Dualistic Unity Social that will be followed by an episode of a roundtable, or rather just a roundtable. So it will be followed by a roundtable number 27, I believe. And I'm very excited about that. If you have not joined a roundtable to date, please do so. It's a hell of a lot of fun. It's a lot like the conversations that we have on Patreon, except that it's an actual episode, which means that all the juicy, good fucking nuggets and insights that we come up with in those conversations gets to see the light of day and get out into the public a little bit and shared with the rest of the community that may not be on our Patreon page. So if you are a tier 2 or a tier 3 supporter, definitely go and check out the sign up form. It was posted this morning on Patreon. You can check that out. Registration's totally free. You can talk about whatever it is you'd like to talk about. If you'd like to talk about your project, if you'd like to ask a question, if you'd like to just vent about something, this is a good opportunity for you to do so, because there is no right thing to do on these episodes. Andrew and I know this. There is no right thing to do. Just go and do. And somebody will get something from it, because you never know what people are looking to learn from. You never know what people can learn from. It's really up to them. So if you don't put yourself out there, you're really not giving them the chance to learn.
Well said. Yeah, they're a blast, the roundtables, and definitely sign up if you're interested. You got to be on Patreon to do so, and they're almost as much fun as the Patreon group chats, but they're pretty close. It's about as close as we can get in public, if you know what I mean. But yeah, no, they're a great time, and that is something that I've been, just like realizing more recently. Like, no one wrote rules to reality. Like, there's no rules written down somewhere of the right way to live or be or what to do for any situation. Like, situationally, like the right way to do a live stream on whatever, all the places we're live streaming right now, Instagram, Twitch, not TikTok, but pretty much everywhere else. And like, no one, like, oh my God, even going into these or going into a podcast episode or doing fucking, like, we're looking for the right way to sleep. Like, we wanted someone else to tell us how many hours of sleep we should be getting, as opposed to just feeling how much sleep we need. And we want to look towards someone else for how to start a podcast, how to do a podcast. And especially with the early ones. And I think that's, I mean, obviously a big part why Joe Rogan's blown up so much is because he was an early one, but he was just shooting the shit with people. That's all it was. There was no structure to it. And he's continued doing that. And he's, and it's funny because now he has, a lot of people will say his podcast is unique in the sense that it's very, very long. It's not directional. He bounces around all the time. And yet he was one of the first to do it. So it's interesting how things get shifted and curated into just what the bulk of people are doing. Like, the right thing to say is what most people would say. The right thing to do is what most people would do. The right way to live is how most people are living. And so, but like, no, like, you're writing the rules to your life all the time. And there's a lot there. I'm like pounding my microphone here. There's a lot there. Like, a lot of fucking depth there. And it's so funny that it seems like an obvious thing when I look at it, but at the same time, you look around, and like I said, with sleep, we want someone to tell us how long to sleep for, or how to live, how to do certain things. The dentist tells us how to brush our teeth. Just like anything you can think of, there's always someone, some expert, some person who knows how to do it. And you put all those things together, and it's how to live life. And it's like we don't realize it, but we're kind of looking around for a book on how to live life and piecing it together ourselves as we go, by looking around, not by writing it ourselves, but by looking around and patching in all of the ways that we see other people doing it. It always reminds me of just when you're in a crowd, like, and a performance ends and you start clapping, but you really enjoyed it. But and maybe this is just me. I don't know, but I don't think it's just me. Who knows? But and you're thinking about standing up, give a standing ovation. So you look around first. I'll look around first to see, oh, is anyone else doing it? See a few more people doing it. Like, then I'll do it. And I'm getting to a point where I'm much more comfortable being the first person to do it. But like, that's a interesting shift because someone's got to do it. Like, someone's got to be the first one to do anything new, but you can't maintain the looking around. Like, you can, but if you don't see anyone, like, that doesn't have to have sway on your decision making. Like, we're always looking around, like maybe it's SpongeBob, some sort of cartoon I'm thinking of. There was a submarine, and then like the eyes pop up, and it like looks around, and then it goes back down. It's almost how I imagine a lot, and I can only speak from my experience, like how I live my life a lot of times. I'll be doing something, and then be curious, be a little unsure. How do I do this, or how do I do that? And so I'll peek my head up, look around, gain some knowledge of things, and then implement those things into my life and patch them in. Maybe make some slight tweaks. And I'm not even saying it like looking around is a bad thing. There's nothing right or wrong about doing anything, but it's how much are you doubting yourself? Because so much of that is that. And even with research, I'm not saying don't do research, but there's like a balance, obviously, with things. And like, why are you looking into something in a specific way, looking for someone else's opinion of something? Is it to validate your own opinion? Is it to look for the right thing to do, the right way to do something? Is there a guarantee that that's the right way? No, of course not. But, as someone who's one of my deeper fucking insecurities is feeling like I have nothing to say, not knowing what to say in a situation. I'm realizing more now how much that's just not being willing to lead, in a sense, and not lead from like a egotistical point of view, but just being willing to live for myself instead of looking and waiting for someone else to make that first move, for someone else to be the first one to stand up, to give a standing ovation, even though I really enjoyed the performance. Why am I waiting to see if anyone else enjoyed it as much as I am, or I did? I I'm just talking through my own stuff right now, as always, but it's funny. And then, yeah. So anyway, it's an interesting one.
It is an interesting one because there's a certain degree of responsibility, I guess, that goes with it, and an understanding of what it is that you're doing. Like, live for yourself, find your own answers. Like, okay, that's kind of what led to, say, the flat earth movement, right? All of a sudden, nobody's looking at research whatsoever. They're just like, I feel this to be true. But the question is, how many of them actually feel it is to be true? And how many of them are just gravitating towards the group? So it's still dictating what you're thinking, just out of need. And that is very much the problem, is when you start recognizing that in order to live for yourself, you have to stop following, which means never settling on anyone else's answers, including your own, because you could be wrong. And so it's living in a state of uncertainty, in a state of growth. That is living for yourself. Otherwise, you're just hitching yourself to another cart. You're just hitching yourself to another train, right? That is ultimately being led by other people. And you're doing so for a reason, because you feel that you would be safer with that group. You feel that, that answer provides you comfort and safety and a sense of security and being right. And so you just gravitate towards it. The alternative is to never know that you are absolutely right. And thus you're always pliable, you're always adaptable, you're always looking at things. I wanted to make a quick mention that we have a bunch of people here at the moment, not just on our channels, but also on Instagram. Hello, everyone. We have a roundtable in about 50 minutes. You can join us. It's at 6 p.m. Eastern time. It's for our tier 2 and tier 3 supporters on Patreon. These roundtable episodes are a blast. They're a lot of fun. If you haven't joined one before, please join one now. I just threw the link up on the screen and in the chat section. Do join us. It's a lot of fun. And we have a 7-day free trial, which means that if you're not a supporter, you can become a supporter for a week and see why it's awesome and that you should have been a supporter all along. Aside from that, we have one more announcement. And then I swear I'll make this more interesting. We have a viral video contest that we are now running. And that viral video contest basically means that you create a video about Dualistic Unity. If you're watching this right now and you don't know, we have a podcast called Dualistic Unity. You can take any of the clips or any group of clips. You can do anything you want, basically, about Dualistic Unity. You can make it your thoughts about Dualistic Unity, your thoughts about us, how it's changed your life. Maybe you don't like us and you want to bitch about it. That's fine too. If that goes viral, kudos to you. The point is that whatever video has the most views as of our February 1st mini retreat in Virginia, which is another thing that we do. We have retreats. Our next one is in Virginia, Virginia Beach, February 1st. By that point, the video that has the most views, that person, the creator, will win a ticket to our California retreat. Absolutely free. Does not include airfare or anything, but it does include your meals. It includes your stay there. It includes all the relative substances that we're going to be doing and all of the other party favors. And it includes your karaoke time. Not that there's ever a charge for that. But the point is that you will win a ticket. And I believe that ticket is regularly around $1,600 US. So it's a hell of a good prize. And all you have to do is create a video, be as creative as you can about Dualistic Unity, and we deeply appreciate it. And so we're looking forward to seeing you in California to say thank you in person.
Checking the Instagram comments. We had a comment. Do we talk about THC here? Yes, and we do it on the podcast as well. We actually have a whole segment called Being High with Dualistic Unity. I think we got 7 episodes. Every single one, we're both baked, and we talk with people who are in the cannabis industry. And they're a lot of fun. Very, very more uncertain, especially, just given being super baked for it. And a lot of times I'm like a little bit uncomfortable and, do my best. And we're always just doing our best going through it. So, we definitely do, especially on the podcast and on our Discord also. So if you check out the podcast or enjoying that, want to talk with some people who are going through a lot of similar insights, definitely check out the Discord. We have channels. We talk about, psychedelic stuff. We talk about cannabis. We talk about work, family, all different sorts of things. We have so many channels. Shout out Jazz for heading all of that. We appreciate it very much because there's a lot going on there, and you've made it pretty fucking dope since you've taken the reins out of us holding them by our fingertips and just throwing it together as best we could. But yeah, and so anyway, there was another comment in here, kind of talking about that, being the one to make the first move and not following someone. And so much of, so the comments were, it's really interesting to do this consciously. A lot of people, quote unquote, just do it unconsciously, but I can relate as perhaps someone who, like most, I guess, might also look around. Yeah, I think most people are doing that, feel that moving towards consciously doing that first move is a big thing. Can kind of feel like you're going crazy. And yeah, I mean, it certainly can. And there's the feeling like almost, oh man. And it hit me like an hour ago how much this comes up in conversations when someone's acting differently. The term out of control or take control or get control over yourself or whatever. Like, no, like realizing that control is an illusion, like it doesn't actually exist. It's funny how we use phrases like that pretty often. Like, I'm feeling like I'm out of control right now. You're always, quote unquote, out of control. You can just sort of curate your perspective on things to give you this false sense of certainty that you are in control. But how often you don't know what's coming next ever. So we'll just think that we do and kind of close our eyes to what's going on right now. Just because there's, oh man, it's interesting how reflective that is of just, collective mentality of thinking that control is a possibility and the right answer. It's like, of course, there's going to be a demonization. Like, one of the worst things you could do is feel like you're out of control, being out of control. I don't know. That phrase just hit me, and I'm like, fuck. I've heard that a bunch throughout my life. And, from lots of different people and situations, and how there's this fear of someone else being out of control, as if you can have not control over them, but it's very much, the stay in line sort of mentality. Look around. You don't want to be judged, right? You want to be doing what everyone else is doing, right? You don't want to feel, bad, do you? And that all those things, like fear of judgment, fear of, you know, not being like everyone else, very much gets in the way, in a huge way, of us being ourselves. And that get back in line mentality, it's like kind of wild how much it's infiltrated so much of what we do. And there's things that I've started to realize that I didn't even, realize were habits based upon that. And you start looking at them, and you're like, oh shit. Ooh, man. All right. There's a lot there. But at the same time, like, you don't have to fucking make it heavy, which I tend to do. Like, make it heavier than it is, almost thinking that, because again, it can be this assumption that there is a right way, and you can know that it's the way that you're not doing it. It's, realizing that it's still not a right way. It's still just sensitivity. And you don't have to make the assumption. I don't have to make the assumption that, if this isn't, I'm doing something wrong. And so I can do something right by not doing it. Like, because it's not that either. It's not the thing that you keep fucking thinking about in your head. It's just what's going on right now. But there isn't that illusion, so much of that illusion of control in that. And it's the same with, being the first mover, or, starting a fucking conversation, even, and just picking something and going with it and running with it. There's no sense of certainty. If you wait till it's already started, then, at least there's that confirmation from, other people who are doing the same thing, other people who are saying the same thing, other people who are acting the same way. There's that subtle confirmation, like, oh, I'm doing something all right. And that kind of goes from moment to moment to, like, just spans out to how we live our lives in our entirety.
It really helps to remember that thinking that you can accomplish anything is going to be perceived as crazy by those who tell themselves they can't. Because to them, that's impossible. You're crazy to try. And that's true for everything, whether it's establishing a different kind of relationship with yourself or establishing a different relationship with the world. I mean, at one point it would have been considered crazy to question the monarchy. Right? At one point, they weren't just kings, they were god kings, right? And people believed in that wholeheartedly. And it would have seemed crazy to doubt that. It would have seemed crazy to doubt the power of the gods. It would have seemed, do you see what I'm saying? Is that the idea of crazy is always really just what's familiar and most everybody has gotten used to. Anything outside of that bubble immediately feels crazy. And it's because, as you were saying, it seems out of control. And really all that means is it's outside of the familiar. I'm not sure what I would do here because I haven't encountered this before. Right? Whereas everything else is something that we've encountered before. So we know how to deal with it because we've dealt with it in the past. Other people have dealt with it. There's that whole support network, that safety that goes with it. But as soon as you start to push beyond the familiar, you will start to feel crazy, especially if it's the common familiar. Because then everybody around you won't understand what you're trying to communicate because you've moved outside of the bubble that they live within and have accepted that is life. That's the problem with the familiar, is that it becomes so familiar that we start to assume it's always been that way. This is why it's so important to teach history to children, right? Because without actual time talking about history, discussing how things have come to be, it's so incredibly easy to just get lost in the way things are, to actually assume they've always been this way. There are teenagers right now where it's just dawning on them that there was an age where the internet did not exist. And it's because they've always been surrounded by the internet. How many people think about the world without electricity? That was only 120 years ago. At one point, if you would have discussed, imagine describing to somebody, say 200 years ago, walking into your home, flipping a switch, and immediately all the lights come on, they would have said you're crazy. And that's the point, is that there hasn't been a discovery, an invention, any kind of exploration that wasn't done by somebody who was called crazy by somebody else who wasn't willing to try. And so when we're talking about crazy, we're just talking about open mindedness. And open mindedness does come with the cost of giving less fucks. And so you can seem a little reckless in being open minded. And that's what leads us to have the courage to discover things and try things and do all that. So it's a trade. You can either live with the comfortable stagnation of familiarity or not.
Oh man. And it's funny too, because even with something, like THC, cannabis, there's a lot of aversion to that still. There's a deeper stigma. And like I can get dramatic with things but like when I do, people will like there's pushback and there's all these reasons, and I'm not even saying, like, just to clarify for anyone, especially like on Instagram, because I've been posting on my story a little bit more, like, I'm not saying everyone should be high all the time. Like, I'm not saying like you should be smoking more weed than you are. Like, I'm not high all, like, I don't smoke all the time.
I am saying that you should be high sometimes.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. But even that, it's because it is absurd. Like, when you actually look at it for what it is, cannabis, you know, like, it's why, like, the fact that that was made illegal, like, banned from people, someone having like a, like, that was illegal. You go to jail for it, is insane. Regardless of, oh, well, this study, this doctor says it impacts this and that. Like, there's like a thousand things that you could point to with those sorts of types of studies that have more impact, that are legal before you do that. Yeah, this is my little shout out PAX Plus. Um, like, so many things. So just saying, and being open and talking about, yeah, it's crazy. It's insane. Like, that there's the stigma, that there's the immediate assumption that you're doing a bad thing if you're smoking. And I know that's not always the case, and there will be plenty of people who are like, no, most people actually don't think it's a bad thing anymore. It's like, yeah, you know what I mean? There's still that stigma. And I'm just talking about myself. Like, there are times where I, will wake and bake, and I feel like I'm doing something wrong, even though I'm just getting up and doing work. Like, I'll go and edit a video for an hour or two. Hi, it's like, okay, well, I'm doing it, doing stuff, being productive, or, going on a run or working out or whatever you do. But it's like, oh, I can't do it high because I'm doing something wrong. And why? It's just so interesting how you start talking about things more, that it's not like we were saying, it just doesn't fit the common existing familiar sort of mentality, like, you can't talk about that. You can't say that, because then I have to question, what I think, or even it coming back to yourself, you know, because it forces you to wonder, why do I have an aversion to cannabis? Like I was putting on my story, if not everyone has the same response to weed, then it's not the weed, it's you. Like, you're the one. It's not making you anything. It's coming from you. Because if you think it's the weed making you anxious or extra paranoid, then everyone would get super anxious and paranoid with it. But that's not the case. Just that right there. And so, if you don't want to look at that and wonder, scratch your head, like, okay, why do I get anxious. Shit, I can't put it on, the cannabis. Maybe it is coming from me. If you're not willing to do that, then you're just gonna demonize cannabis. You're gonna say it's a bad thing that's doing it to me. And I think that was kind of like spanned out to be a big reason why it was made illegal. I mean, obviously with the hemp and cotton industry and all that, that was a big part. And, all the propaganda, we can look up Reefer Madness from the 30s, but even just anything, it's not even things that make sense. And I feel like I've always been like a logical person, when something starts to not make sense or make sense, I get curious about it. And yeah, and something like that. It's like it's crazy, but even the obvious, if it's not part of the familiar common dialogue norm, then you're going to sound crazy if you start talking about it like Galileo, recognizing that the sun doesn't revolve around the earth revolves around the sun. Like that dude was killed for it, basically, right? He was killed for it. Yeah, not just jail. Yeah, killed
Or he was imprisoned
or
for life.
imprisoned.
For life. For life. Like not for a while, for the rest of his life, he was imprisoned. That said, though, I'd like to bring up a comparison because we never really talk about this, but it's true. Nobody ever compares marijuana to the one drug that we're all using consistently that has a measurable effect on our state of mind, and you can see it anywhere that you see that you see anyone consuming it more and more and more. Fucking sugar. Sugar is a drug. Sugar is a drug and a half. That's why, if you give your kids a fuck ton of sugar, what's going to happen? Why do you think that stops as an adult? Do you think that stops as an adult? No, you've just developed a fucking tolerance. Oh, maybe you should take a tolerance break from sugar, right? Because that is not something that was ever part of our diet to the capacity that it is right fucking now. Ever. We didn't have bags of sugar a couple hundred years ago. Like, it was rare, unless of course you were baking or you were cooking as a part of your job. I mean, there just wasn't this degree of convenience. I mean, we have sugar in fucking everything. Man, they use it in rolling papers on cigarettes, for fuck's sakes. And it's because they know it's addictive. And yet nobody talks about sugar. And yet, when you talk about the health impacts, people will talk about cannabis like, oh, it's bad for you. Yeah. What's the one thing they always talk about? Smoking. They talk about smoking. Okay? They don't talk about the fact that sugar is the root cause of obesity, of diabetes, of fucking so many fucking problems. Nobody talks about that at all. They're just like, cannabis is bad for you. I don't use drugs as I pour this fucking shit into my coffee every fucking day. Every snack I eat, every chip I eat, everything I eat has fucking corn syrup in it. Everything is laced with sugar all the fucking time. And we don't think that's making us high. We don't think that makes us a bit more agitated or a little bit more prone to anxiety. We don't think that's fucking with our mentality. Yet we'll bitch about cannabis.
Oh man, now you got me thinking. I'm like, yeah, I fall in that category. Like I've always been like, oh yeah, I got a sweet tooth. And it's funny because I'm glad I could laugh about it because there was a point in my life where I probably would have been like, oh, he knows that I have a sweet tooth. He probably judges me now that he's bringing up the topic talking about sugar. It's like, no, it's like, yeah. And I'm not alone, certainly, but it's something to look at. Now you got me wondering, should I take a tolerance break from sugar? Someone suggested I take a cannabis break. Meanwhile, I take a fucking 3-week cannabis break easy. That's the easiest thing for me to do because it's, there's stuff that comes up. It's super easy to not feel like you're comfortable in your certainty about what's going on versus cannabis kind of strips a lot of that away. But the beauty is that you're left with just yourself right now and an opportunity to do something with that. So yeah, fucking A, dude. I wonder. Yeah, I like fruit a lot. So maybe just stick with fruit. But even that's been fucking
Which would have been a natural
yeah.
source, though. You see, right? Once upon a time, I like thinking back to once upon a time when we actually had to live with the land. Like that's where we would get a lot of our sugars was from fruits and things like that. It wasn't like you could just go and refine sugar on your own, right? And sugarcane sure as shit didn't grow everywhere. So there's always natural sources of these things. It's just that we have control, right? And this is the cost of control is the more you have of it, the more you can indulge, the more you can ignore the side effects, the more you can skew things, according to your advantage. Because you got to admit, like the sugar industry is fucking huge.
Yeah, and it really is in everything. And now I'm like fucking scratching my head. It's like, all right, let's let's talk about this a little bit because it is in fucking everything. And even with fruit, there's and I've always discounted that, the side of the impact like gut brain connection and all of that. Now I'm starting to get more curious and I know there's some people in my life who I had a strong stance on, the just the lack of impact, not on like I get eating quote unquote healthy, but I think people like to look at everything in silo and not look at the full picture. And if you look at just something that has a massive impact like obesity, like I've kind of looked at it like someone say in that position who's like 200 pounds overweight. A lot of what they see is, you know, eat healthy and eat these things that, you know, maybe are higher calorie that make it tougher. And there's so much to everything all the time, like so many things to factor in, so many considerations to take in. So when you look at something like that, if there's a way for them to, lose some extra weight eating quote unquote not the most natural diet, it's like that's maybe something that's all right. But I've certainly discounted the way it can impact how you feel. Not that it's feeling good, but it is it's that immediate satisfaction versus the lack of that, the instant gratification versus, all right, let me take a step back here and think about, my life as a whole, my experience as a whole. And you can prioritize superficial shit, like looking good and then discount how you feel or how it may be impacting the way that you feel. And so with something like sugar, how much we may not even know just because it's been something that we've always done and always had. It's kind of like, we can get into just making assumptions about yourself and thinking about yourself. The most addictive thing by a million that we do in the world is think about ourselves. And so something like sugar that's in everything, even as you said, cigarette papers, I didn't know that, but anything you consume and even fruit has been modified now to be sweeter than it used to be. So even that is getting pumped full with sugar. Like that's making me scratch my head because I haven't really thought about that yet. Maybe that's the next sort of thing I dig into and just try for myself, see how I feel without doing that. Cause that's the beauty of this is like, experiment. And I've always enjoyed experimenting on myself with things. If there's a diet I'm curious about, it's like, I'm not just going to read about it. Let's see how it feels. Let's see how easy it is to maintain versus difficult, how it shifts my, I don't know, perceptions of things. And so, yeah, might be next thing. And part of me's like, maybe after the holidays. I'm like, we'll see. We'll see. you know. But
And it's funny though, because this is always the danger with everything, right? Is that you start to think like, oh shit, you know, I have to stop doing that entirely. I have to find the right amount to do that. I have to find the right and it's just it comes down to that whole thing about like losing weight. It's not about necessarily eating healthier. It's about recognizing when you need to eat versus when you're just eating, right? And that comes down to slowing down and exercising awareness and recognizing that we all have something that we reach for in order to avoid how we feel right now. That's really what it is. And the more you can just sit through how you feel rather than reaching for something that satisfies you and distracts you, the more you're going to lose weight. And that's the case with everything. For example, I smoke weed. We know I smoke weed. I smoke weed and then I get high. And then I stop being high because it wears off. And then it's on me to keep relaxing, which I do with fucking, great panache. I just keep relaxing. And then later on, after being quote unquote sober, which really doesn't feel that much different because I'm doing the work the entire time, I'll smoke a joint and get high. But at no point am I like power puffing because I got to prove how much I can smoke. And I'm not like going from like one joint to another joint because I'm a pothead. Glory to the cannabis. All that shit. It really just comes down to awareness and sensitivity and being honest with yourself. Nothing is a silver bullet, but that doesn't mean it can't be enjoyed. And it really just comes down to moderation. And that really just comes down to sensitivity. And that requires you to be present. Right. And that's often what we're avoiding is that being present. Because it's in the present that we feel uncomfortable because we're left with our thoughts. We're left with our habit to judge ourselves. We're left with, all of our perceptions of everybody else. We're left with the world that we have imagined our way into for our entire lives. And because we don't want to be responsible for imagining our way into that world, we just distract ourselves every time we're left in it. This is why we don't sit still. This is why we're always reaching for something to satisfy us. This is why we get addicted to things, to basically create a cessation to the suffering that's caused by the world we've imagined ourselves into, whether we recognize it or not. So, yeah, it just comes down to, again, moderation. Be in the present. Sit through that discomfort. And what you'll recognize is that enough time in discomfort becomes more comfortable. Suddenly your tolerance increases. You're not so easily shaken because you are actually in reality. And the more you go down that path, the more you sink into the present moment, the more you will understand the value of moderation because you're not satisfying a need. Therefore, you can make a conscious choice.
Yeah, because it always just comes back to you, right? With all of the, all of the substances, all of the things we consume, they can give us the opportunity to see things differently, feel differently in a sense, but it's still coming from us. It's still coming from me. And I can even just being willing to see different sides of yourself, like different ways of acting, be it, maybe if you're super serious all the time and think that that's the right way to live, then smoking some weed, like, may bring out a little bit of a goofier, looser, funnier side of yourself. And if you don't see that as something that's valuable, if you don't prioritize that as being something that's worthwhile, and if you're trying to build this idea of yourself, you're going to take everything very seriously because everything is for this end game. And so I think in a world where people do take things very, very, very seriously, there is going to be some aversion to being a little bit more relaxed, being a little bit looser, being a little bit more silly. Because, like, oh, if I'm too silly, then I'm going to get judged for that. And so that can be a lot of our resistance with something like cannabis is if we're maintaining a perception of ourself in a certain way and thinking about ourselves in a very specific way, then smoking may, cause some different perspectives to arise. And our resistance to that, or our aversion to not even being any of the things that we're thinking about, but seeing that, oh, maybe the way that I'm seeing myself isn't correct, which means that maybe you don't have to keep thinking about yourself all the time because you recognize that they're all assumptions. It's if there's an aversion to letting go of that false certainty of the way that you look, it's going to be, or the way that you see yourself, it's going to be, there's going to be anxiety, paranoia, all these different things that we call those things that come up, but really it's just resistance. It's just names that we have for resistance or concern or trying to be certain. When that certainty gets stripped, we'll settle on anything, even things that maybe make us feel a little bit more anxious or paranoid despite being in that same uncertainty all the time, because that's then allows us to distract ourselves from just being where we're at, prioritizing our experience right now as opposed to continuously looking ahead, like never being satisfied, never being finished, like never reaching a point in which we can just relax and chill out. Like there's almost a assumption that goes along with this mentality that I'm gonna go until I die. Like I never reach the end point. Not saying that you do, but like the end point is here, and there's that balance. But I know a lot of people who make the assumption that there isn't an end point. It's just this sort of being driven for your whole life. Oh, if I stop being driven, then I'm giving up. Then I'm not giving it my all. Then I'm not doing this thing. And I found that even with just running that marathon. Like I really enjoyed doing that. And it was interesting because in the past I would have definitely set goals, been thinking about what I'm going to accomplish the whole time, and it just was hitting me so hard in the face throughout that process how much it's just me trying to feel better about myself. If I were to set that goal and accomplish it, it's not to say that there's anything wrong with that, but when you look at it, it's like no one else fucking cares what time you get in that. Like, are you not just gonna enjoy that, or are you gonna keep trying to do the next thing, accomplish the next thing, to what? To feel a little bit better about yourself, to reinforce that falsely certain narrative that you're holding on to about yourself.
Exactly. We have just a few minutes left here. There was a comment, and I just wanted to address it quickly. For some adverse, I'm assuming it's for some with adverse childhood experiences, trauma, and being prone to addiction, they will not have the same relationship with cannabis or alcohol or other substances. And so I just wanted to say very quickly that cannabis is not other substances. I understand what you're saying because the person that you just described was me. I get what you're saying. And what I'm saying is that there are countless other vices that are far fucking worse, including just self-judgment, self-absorption, competition, and not to mention sugar, of course, but you've got tobacco, you've got alcohol, you've got harder drugs. If they come to a vice and it's cannabis, yeah, that may make them a little less productive, but why is that a bad thing? Like every time we're like, oh, this is bad for people with childhood trauma. Why? Because it teaches them to calm the fuck down, right? Or to deal with what's going through their head. I'm not saying necessarily that, you must use cannabis because it's good for you, but it's not necessarily bad for you either. Out of all of the things that you could take in this world, the cannabis plant is one of the least fucking harmful, right? In numerous different ways, not only as a food, but also as a psychoactive compound, something for your mental health as well as your physical health. So I would say in the case of that while I appreciate the caution, I think you have to compare it to the other options that exist out there. Like if somebody who's gone through childhood trauma, who is a little bit prone to addiction, who is dealing with some PTSD or dealing with some bad memories, if the one thing they gravitate to is cannabis and it makes them a little lazy for a few years while they come to a point where they can calmly look at their shit, where's the harm? Outside of harm to the system and its plan of what the fuck we should be doing. Oh, you're not working as hard as you could be. You're not, setting those goals. You're just lazing around. Well, if you can just laze around, good for fucking you. If that's the time you need for your healing journey, good for fucking you. I just don't hold with this idea that, cannabis is in itself, a bad thing for you. I think that there are numerous other things that are far worse. Far worse. And I'm not just talking substances, I'm talking about states of mind. Feeling like you need to be in control, feeling like you need to be more, feeling like there's a right way, which is fucking echoing right through this comment. All of that shit will poison your life. If the alternative is to smoke a joint, take yourself less seriously, fucking do that. We got about 30 seconds left. Thanks for the rant. I appreciate it. We're going to be continuing on a roundtable after this, so definitely join us there if you can. If I don't get your name in the next 5 minutes or so, though, I'm not emailing you the invitation. Sorry, but do remember our free ticket for the California retreat that you can win by making a viral video.
Yeah, well said. There was a follow up. Like context is so big, and we can get into this next because I know we got a couple seconds here. But there was a follow up, like you said. Eventually, you build a tolerance. It stops working for some. It's like, okay, and like if it's quote unquote stops working for some, you stop using it. Like that is so far from like being beneficial to an argument that you should stay away from it. Like, oh, it stops working. Okay, then stop using it. Even if that was the case, like, then stop. Like, okay, that's not like that doesn't make it a bad thing. I don't know. Anyway,
Well, and what do you mean by working? Like, oh, it
yeah,
stops relaxing you. It's like that's where you pick up the way. That's where you learn to relax. It's meant to teach you another mindset. It's not always going to get you there. Like the lack of responsibility there is a huge thing as well. This is what I say. Like, it's not about the substances. It really is about responsibility and using them. Understanding that it's still you. Anyway, we're going to end this here. This has been a lot of fun.
bye everyone.